This video, I'm going to go over questions 9 through 16 from the Topic 2 test review. So this is covering the short answer portion of your exam. So all these questions will be very similar in nature, and you have to show all your work to get all of the points that are listed next to each question. So the first one is asking us to simplify each difference. Remember, that means subtraction. So the first thing that you need to do is distribute the negative, which means you're going to change every single sign of the polynomial following the subtraction. This was the most common thing people didn't do on the quiz that had a question like this. So once you've changed all the signs, what I would do is line up the like terms from the first polynomial underneath those. So if I have a plus a squared, I'm going to write plus a squared underneath the a squared here. And I have a plus 8, so I'm going to write a plus 8 underneath my plus 3. So then when I add, I want to write my answer in standard form. So the highest power is the 4th power, so I'm going to write 5a to the 4th first. Then I would look for a 3rd power, but notice we don't have one. So we're going to move on to the 2nd. So for the 2nd power, we are going to combine a squared plus a squared, so plus 2a squared. Then we only have one linear term, so minus 4a. And then finally, 3 plus 8 is going to give us 11. So the answer for this is 5a to the 4th plus 2a squared minus 4a plus 11. Number 10 wants us to find the product. So we're multiplying a binomial times a trinomial, which means we should end up with 6 terms that we then have to combine. So 6x times 4x squared gives us 24x cubed. 6x times negative 5x is negative 30x squared. And finally, 6x times 3 is plus 18x. Then we want to look at the next number in that binomial and multiply that through. So negative 1 is just going to change signs. So I'm going to turn positive 4x squared into negative 4x squared. And negative 1 times negative 5x is going to be plus 5x. And finally, negative 1 times 3 is going to be minus 3. So when we combine like terms, which I lined up appropriately to save myself a little bit of time, I've got 24x cubed minus 34x squared plus 23x minus 3. And so that is the expansion of 6x minus 1 times 4x squared minus 5x plus 3. Problem 11 is asking us to state if the given binomial is a factor of the given polynomial, and if so, we want to write it as a product of the 2 factors. And so what we're looking for is, does it go in evenly? So does the remainder equal 0 if I divide these? So when I look at my divisor, notice that it is linear with a leading coefficient of 1, and so that tells me that I can use synthetic division. And so since it's b plus 6, its 0 would be negative 6. So I'm going to write that out there, and then I'm going to list the coefficients of my dividend. Notice that I'm not missing any terms: 3rd power, 2nd power, 1st power, constant. So I'm going to write a 1 for the leading coefficient, 16 for the next one, then 61, and 6. And so we want this to equal 0. If it does, then yes, it's a factor. We're going to write out our answer. If not, we're going to just say no. So we're going to bring down the 1. 1 times negative 6 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 16 is 10. Negative 6 times 10 is negative 60. Negative 60 plus 61 is 1. And then negative 6 times 1 is negative 6, which gives us a remainder of 0. So this means that yes, it's a factor. say yes, x. Oh no, it's v. Yes, v plus 6 is a factor. And so what we're writing then is our product is v plus 6 times, so our divisor, times the expression that's related to our result. So remember that because this was v to the third power, our result is going to be v squared. So our quotient is 1v squared plus 10v plus 1. So it's v plus 6 times v squared plus 10v plus 1. Okay, so these two things are the answer, right? So it's asking us is it a factor? And then if it is, write it as a product of two factors. Question 12 is asking us to write and simplify a function for the volume V of the tray that they're describing here in terms of x. So Julio cuts 4 squares with a side length x inches from the corners of a 5 by 12 inch cardboard rectangle. So we've got a rectangle that's 5 inches by 12 inches. And then they cut out the corners where each of these little corners are x. So notice that if I imagine that these corners are gone, then I fold up the kind of plus sign looking thing, and that would make a tray. And so that means that the length is going to be, since these were both x, 12 minus 2x inches. And the width, since again these are both x, is now going to be 5 minus 2x inches. If I think about the height of the tray, right, so that would represent this distance here. So this, whoops, I didn't change the color. So this would represent the height because it'll fold up and all these will kind of connect to each other. And so if that's the height, that means the height is equal to x inches. And so it wants me to represent the volume. So volume is length times width times height. So I'm going to multiply 12 minus 2x times 5 minus 2x times x. So let's start by just multiplying the binomials, because multiplying by x is easy. We're just going to change all the powers. So if I multiply out the binomials, 12 times 5 is 60. 12 times negative 2x is minus 24x. Then I'm going to multiply the negative 2x times 5, so minus 10x. And negative 2x times negative 2x is going to give us plus 4x squared. And so that is just that one piece. So I'm going to actually erase this equal sign. So that's going to equal this guy, which is, if we write it in standard form, 4x squared minus 34x plus 60 times x. So when I multiply this by x, I'm just increasing all the powers by 1 as I distribute. So that's going to be 4x cubed minus 34x squared and then plus 60x inches cubed. So the representation of the volume of the tray is 4x cubed minus 34x squared plus 60x cubic inches. Question 13 is asking us to use polynomial identities to factor the polynomial. So this is either going to be a sum of cubes or a difference of cubes. So notice that we have a plus sign here. So that means that we want to think about this as a cubed plus b cubed. So remember that you need to have the formula memorized that this expansion factors to a plus b, times a squared minus ab plus b squared. And so we talked about that acronym SOAP. So this is the same sign as this one. This is the opposite sign of this one, and this sign is always positive. So all that would change if this was a minus sign instead is that this would be minus and that would be plus. This one would still be positive. So you do need to know the difference of cubes formula as well, not just the sum of cubes. The only difference again is that sign. And so ultimately what you're looking at is to determine what A is and what B is. You're really just taking the cube root of the first term. So the cube root of 125 is 5. And then to figure out B, you're taking the cube root of the second term, which is 64x cubed. So the cube root of 64 is 4, and then the cube root of x cubed is x. So x times itself 3 times makes x cubed, 4 times itself 3 times makes 64. So all that we're doing is evaluating this expression using those numbers. So we're plugging in 5 for each a, and we're plugging in 4x for each b. So we have a plus b times, and I'm going to use some parentheses because we have to square things and multiply them. So I'm just writing out, I should use a bracket because I used a bracket there. I'm just writing out the expression with blanks, and then I'm going to put the a's and the b's into their appropriate places. So if a is 5, the first term of the first expression is a, and the first two terms of the second expression are a. So 5 and 5. And then the last term and the last two terms are b. So b here is 4x, 4x, 4x. And so to write our answer, the first, that binomial never simplifies, so it's just 5 plus 4x. The trinomial, though, always should. So 5 squared is 25. 5 times 4 is 20, so this is going to become 20x. And then 4x squared is 16x squared. So be careful with that number. So that's one of the most common mistakes when students are evaluating a problem like this, is not actually squaring the coefficient on the x. For question 14, they are asking us to use synthetic division. So we know that we can because they're telling us we can. Again, we know we can because this is linear with a leading coefficient of 1. So what we want to use is the 0 of this. So the 0 of this would be the number 2. So our divisor, 0 is 2. We're going to list out the coefficients of the dividend. So our leading power is 4. Our next power is 3. So we're going to use that coefficient, then 2, then 1, then a constant. So we know that we don't need any zeros because all of our powers descend down. So we've got 1 for the first one, then 5, then negative 23, then positive 23, and then negative 16. So for this one, we are going to have to write our answer. And so we want to go through and find all of our coefficients first. So our leading coefficient is going to drop down and be 1. 2 times 1 is 2. 5 plus 2 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14. 14 minus 23 is negative 9. 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. Negative 18 plus 23 is going to leave us with no positive 5. And then 2 times 5 is 10. So our remainder is going to be negative 6. So this question was asking us to divide. So we do have to write out the answer. Because this first term was a to the 4th, remember we're dividing by a to the first power. So it's always going to drop down by 1. So that's going to represent a cubed, then a squared, then a, our constant, and then this one is going to be divided by a minus 2. So our answer is a cubed plus 7a squared minus 9a plus 5 minus 6 over a minus 2. So that one was synthetic division. Again, it told us to, so notice the directions are going to be the same on the test. Then this one is long division. So what we want to look at is even though our divisor is linear, because that's a leading coefficient of 2, we have to use long division anyway, so we couldn't even use synthetic kind of to check our answer. Versus for 14, you could divide using long division just to double check that your synthetic is correct. So that's a good way to double check your answer if you have time. Our divisor here, though, again, is not is linear, but without a leading coefficient of 1. So first thing we want to check is our divisor in standard form, and is it missing any coefficients or any terms? So a cubed is going to come first. So we've got 18a cubed. Then we're going to have a squared, so minus 48a squared. Then we should have an a, so minus 26a. And finally, plus our constant, which is 34. So as we're doing long division, remember that our steps are that we're going to divide, then we're going to multiply, then we're going to subtract, and then we're going to keep repeating that. When we divide, we're only looking at the first term of each piece. So I'm really dividing 18a cubed by 2a. And that gives me 18 divided by 2 is 9, and then a cubed divided by a is a squared. Remember, the power drops down by 1. So that gives me 9a squared. The piece that I multiply by is always my divisor. So I'm going to multiply that number times my divisor, and I'm going to write that underneath the terms here. So 9a squared times 2a is going to give me 18a cubed. And then 9a squared times negative 6 is going to give me negative 54a squared. So notice that I have like terms here. I'm going to now, so I did the multiply, now I'm going to subtract. Remember, when I'm subtracting, because there's two terms here, I'm changing both of these. So it turns into negative 18a cubed plus 54a squared, because that will allow it to cancel out. So I was matching this term so that when I subtract, it goes away. So I have negative 48a squared plus 54a squared. So that's going to give us 6a squared, and then we're going to drop down the negative 26a. So I'm looking at now 6a squared divided by that 2a. So notice that's always the same. 6 divided by 2 is going to give us 3. A squared divided by a is a. So I'm going to write that up here. That's going to be part of my answer. And then I'm going to multiply times my divisor of 2a minus 6. So when I do that, I get, let me switch colors, 3a times 2a is 6a squared. And then 3a times negative 6 is negative 18a. So when we subtract those terms, we're going to change the signs. And so we get negative 6a squared and positive 18a. So that's going to cancel here. And then negative 26a plus 18a gives us negative 8a. And then we're going to bring down the plus 34. So we're going to take negative 8a and divide that by the 2a. So again, look, we divided by 2a every time. That's going to give us negative 8 divided by 2 is negative 4. The a's end up canceling. We're going to multiply this times our divisor of 2a minus 6. So that negative 4 is the last term in our quotient. tend to change. So the negative 4 is going to go up here with our quotient. And then we're going to multiply through negative 4 times negative 2a is negative 8a. Negative 4 times positive 6 is plus 24. After we multiply, we always subtract. So we're going to change the signs here. So we're going to cancel. And then 34 minus 24 is 10. So that means that our answer for this problem is 9a squared plus 3a minus 4 with the remainder of 10. So we're going to put that over our divisor, 2a minus 6. For problem 16, we are asked to For number 16, we are asked to sketch the graph of the function by finding zeros, identify the end behavior, intervals it is increasing, decreasing, positive, and negative. So for this one, we're going to kind of estimate those values for the increasing, decreasing based on where we decide our maximum and minimum are going to be. So since our function is in standard form to start, let's do end behavior first. So this is a cubic function, so it's an odd degree, and the leading coefficient is positive. So remember, that means we're thinking about a positive slope line. And so as x approaches negative infinity, so on the left, our graph is also approaching negative infinity for y. And on the right, it's approaching positive infinity. So it's pointing down on the left and up on the right. The zeros we are going to get by factoring. So let's write our function down in this space here. So x cubed plus 4x squared plus 4x. So what I want to do is factor out any common factors, which in this case is just x. And then that leaves me with x squared plus 4x plus 4. So if I look at a product sum, I want to find two numbers that multiply to 1 times 4, which is 4, and add to 4. And so 4 only has two sets of factors, 1 times 4 and 2 times 2. And so since 1 plus 4 is 5, that means that 2 plus 2 is the one that's going to work. So what this means is that this is x times, since they're both the same number, technically we're looking at x plus 2 times x plus 2, but we want to think about that as x plus 2 squared. So to identify the zeros, I want to take each factor and set them equal to 0. And so if I set x equal to 0, that means that my first 0 is 0. If I set x plus 2 equal to 0, that's going to give me a negative 2. Remember that because this was squared, we want to say that this has a multiplicity of 2. And so what that tells us about our graph is that it's going to cross at 0 and touch at negative 2. So we want to start by plotting the zeros. So our first 0 is at 0. Our second 0 is at negative 2. The end behavior tells us that on the left side, we're going to go down. So we're going to draw from our negative 2 an arrow going down. The right side's going up. And so notice that if I look at the graph, I really have two options. So my graph can go like this, or my graph can go like this. Ooh, I should make that a little bit. Or my graph can go like that. And so what tells me which one is correct is the cross and touch. And so it's crossing at 0. So if I look at 0, that's the red portion, right? The red portion is crossing at 0 and then touching at negative 2. Okay, so that means that this blue one, I'm going to erase it because that's not appropriate that's not the correct graph. So you can always kind of draw both in when it looks like this and check and see, okay, which one's meeting the requirements that the zeros state. So now that we have that in, we can answer questions about increasing, decreasing, positive, and negative. And so when it's increasing, it has a positive slope. So I'm going to highlight here increasing sections. And so when I identify those on my x-axis, remember that this represents negative infinity and this represents positive infinity on the x-axis. So my graph is increasing on the left side, so from negative infinity until -2. And again, we'll say at -1. And for the rest of the graph, so to infinity. The graph is decreasing then in the section that I didn't highlight. So it's decreasing from -2 to +1. So that section, if I highlight it, let's use pink, is here. So that is the section where it's decreasing. I'm gonna erase that just because it's kind of dark. Okay, so then we're looking at positive, negative. So if I look at where my graph is positive, it's positive in this section. It's above the x-axis over here. And then that's it. So that means that my graph is positive from 0 to infinity. And then it's negative on this section of the graph. So it's negative from negative infinity. And then it's actually 0 at -2. So we technically would need to write -2 and then -2 to 0 to kind of break that up. However, if you were to not write this piece, if you were to write negative infinity to 0 on the test, I wouldn't mark you wrong. Actually, it'll give you those intervals, so you're filling it in with the words. So it'll give you the interval on the test, and then you have to say that it's increasing, decreasing, positive, or negative for each of them. Okay, so keep in mind that there's a lot going on in this problem, which is why it's worth 14 points. So even if you just think about like the blanks, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 things that you're looking at just in terms of that. And then you'll have 3 points for that your graph matches your zeros and your end behavior, and that you drew the red portion, remember, because I had that blue portion up at the top too, so that you drew the right graph. Great, so that's all for the topic 2 test. So make sure that you're studying this review, looking for questions on the homework that are similar, and then you should be successful for it.